Hi everyone, today we have a comparison between the iPhone 16 Pro and the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. Now this is going to be a long one because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to these two phones, especially the new iPhone 16 Pro in comparison. Either way, let's dive into the video starting with the specifications, and I would appreciate a little like or long watch time, for this video, because this one took a little bit and then the algorithm will be happy. Anyway, let's dive into the video. So let's quickly run over the specifications. We get a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 in the Xiaomi, where we get a A18 Pro on the iPhone. For the Xiaomi you get from 12GB up to 16GB of RAM, where with the iPhone it's just 8GB of RAM. For memory, with the Xiaomi it's 256GB of starting RAM up to 1TB, where with the iPhone it starts at 128GB up to 1TB as well. We get a 6.73-inch LTPO AMOLED display with 120Hz refresh rate and a peak brightness of 3000 nits for the Xiaomi. Where on the iPhone 16 Pro we get an LTPO Super Retina XDR OLED panel with 120Hz refresh rate as well and a peak brightness of 2000 nits. For the Xiaomi global unit we get a 5000 mAh battery with a charger included. For the iPhone we get a 3582 mAh battery, however, naturally, no charger included. Now the hardware that we care about. On the Xiaomi we get a 50 megapixel main sensor with variable aperture between 1.6 and 4.0 and it's a 1-inch sensor. On the iPhone it's a 48 megapixel sensor with an f-stop of 1.8 and a 1/1.28 inch sensor size. We get a 50 megapixel telephoto with an f-stop of 1.8 on the Xiaomi, where the sensor size is a 1/2.51 inch sensor size. And of course we get a Periscope, which is also a 50 megapixel resolution, as well as an f-stop of 2.5 and the sensor size again a 1/2.51. Where on the iPhone we get a 12 megapixel Periscope telephoto with an f-stop of 2.8 and a 1/3.06 inch sensor size. We also get a 50 megapixel sensor size for the ultra wide on the Xiaomi with an f-stop of 1.8, 12mm equivalent, and again the same sensor size of a 1/2.51 inch sensor size. For the iPhone we get a 48 megapixel sensor for the ultra wide with an f-stop of 2.2, 13mm equivalent, however we do not have any information about the sensor size. Max video recording on the iPhone is 4K 120 frames per second, which also is supported by the Xiaomi, but you can also go up to 8K and 30 frames per second on the Xiaomi. For the front facing camera we have a 32 megapixel camera on the Xiaomi with an f-stop of 2.0 and the sensor size is a 1/3.14 inch. Where on the iPhone it's a 12 megapixel sensor with an f-stop of 1.9 and a 1/3.6 inch sensor size, with max video recording for both being 4K and 60 frames per second. Now with the specs out of the way, this is probably going to be one of my longest videos, starting with this shot. So with this shot the iPhone really crushed all the colors that are there, making the trees look very dull compared to reality. Now the Xiaomi is a bit off as well, but the warmth is captured far better, especially when zooming in you can see more details on the Xiaomi as well, where on the iPhone you see the lack of details. But also the lack of proper focus, and this is something that will happen more often in this comparison, where I tapped on the window to focus for both of them, but with the iPhone you clearly see that it didn't really focus on that properly. Now in this shot it shows the huge differences between the two and their approaches. The Xiaomi looks really beautiful, capturing the soul of the situation and what it was like, but the iPhone looks really flat and dull and seems to be scared of having shadows. And this is with the main sensor, the most comparable between these two. You'll see what I mean later on. Now with this bridge shot I will say while the iPhone goes a bit overboard with the yellow on the bridge affecting the green part of it as well, the picture looks better for me on the iPhone. A nicer contrast comes with it as well on the bridge, where the Xiaomi in this case is the one that looks more pale and more flat. But sadly for the iPhone that's more of a standout thing where it's switched around. But still something that I wanted to showcase for the fairness of this comparison and something that I've noticed. In this shot for instance, the character is so important. It's so important to capture that feel right. But in this case, the Xiaomi simply is leagues above the iPhone. The feel, the soul, the character is captured far better, with unneeded brightness and saturation on the iPhone as well. Now in this shot, it's not even close. Sure, the Xiaomi can capture some brighter shots as well in some cases, but it will still keep those shadows that are so important. It makes a shot have depth and character, where with the iPhone, this shot really looks terrible, where the details on the water become more like asphalt than water. It looks poor. Last shot before we go to a different situation so we can see some differences there as well. Here, yes, the Xiaomi has a bit too much of a dark sky and the gradient wasn't there like it showcased. But the shot looks far more appealing with less bloom going on compared to the iPhone, especially if you look at the sign itself. Not to mention, if you zoom in, once again, that focus problem is there. I tapped on the windmill to capture the focus point for both of them, but when you look close at the iPhone, you see that it's off focus. Now a simple flower shot. Not much can go wrong here, right? Well, the iPhone took a little bit more tries to get the shot and get the focus there, but there's a clear blur line going around the trees, which looks even worse on the phone itself. And in terms of look and feel, the Xiaomi clearly has my preference here. But that is of course preference, and that's something you have to judge for yourself. But I will say in terms of reality, the Xiaomi is a bit darker than what it really was. And of course the iPhone does have quite a bit more sharpening going on compared to the Xiaomi, which is quite a bit softer. In this shot, fairness, there's a bit of a composition difference, so we're gonna try to judge the shot itself. I was shooting with several phones and one of them was of course the iPhone and the Xiaomi, and therefore there's a little bit of a height difference. But judging the picture itself, the Xiaomi clearly is more color accurate. But more important, it keeps the feel of the shot itself really well. I actually really like this shot, where while the iPhone shot is perfectly fine for a flat image, it leaves me very unimpressed, feeling like this is a shot that I can do with any other phone. Now with this shot, the sun is basically facing the cameras behind the clouds. Now at this moment the clouds were moving decently fast, so do keep that in mind where we have a little bit of a difference in the sky itself. Now the iPhone clearly has the brightest shot out of the two, especially when it comes to the pebble itself. The building itself looks quite similar on both of them, but also a difference in terms of sharpening. You can see much more sharpening going on, mainly on the fountain when it comes to the iPhone itself. Talking about that fountain, here a bit of a closer up. I will say again, the iPhone is too bright for me, but that's a personal preference. In reality, it was closer to what we are seeing with the Xiaomi when it comes to the fountain itself, that looks more detailed without it sharpening way too much. But the pebbles are closer to reality on the iPhone in terms of brightness of them, and I do like the bit more shadow on the statue on the iPhone. Time to move inside now, and whoa, this is a big difference, and it showcases the issues that I have with the iPhone. The shot is very bright, it doesn't have any character, and because of its approach it looks a lot flatter compared to the Xiaomi. The Xiaomi is much closer to reality as well, having a nicer balance and a better effect, giving some depth to the shot that looks far more detailed, where the iPhone does a lot more sharpening on the designs that we see on the ceiling. Which, by the way, isn't the same as actual details. In this shot, while the Xiaomi instantly feels better, there are some things that I will have to give credit for when it comes to the iPhone. Look at the dynamic range out of the windows. Very well done here from the iPhone. Now we know that Xiaomi isn't the best with the dynamic range, but it is still important to note that the iPhone did do really well here when it comes to the dynamic range. Now when it comes to feel, warmth, coziness, yeah, the iPhone doesn't stand a chance here, with again a feeling of a very flat image compared to what you get on, for instance, the Xiaomi, and too much sharpening on the details. Sure, it works on the chandelier to a degree, but for the curtains, it really doesn't do well. In this shot again, it's not even close. The Xiaomi captured far better what the scene represents, the feel of it, and where on the Xiaomi it looks comfortable, cozy, a bed I would love to lay in. On the iPhone it looks sharp, not cozy at all, and it looks like a rock hard bed that I would rather pass on. Now what I really like about this place are the amount of details that are here, the feeling that it gives, this nice warmer feeling to a degree. And of course the craftsmanship in this place itself that I'm able to capture here. And in this shot, while the iPhone has a lot more sharpening going on, I don't think it's going overboard apart from some parts in the shot itself. And in terms of style, of course I prefer the Xiaomi, but in reality it was somewhere in between in terms of brightness. In this hallway again, I would say for myself it isn't even close. The Xiaomi has far more depth to the shot itself. The warmer ceiling that looks very cold on the iPhone. The wood that looks far more like reality on the Xiaomi, giving that proper darker look with some nice shadows. Versus the iPhone that has a very basic approach. Too much brightness on important details that shouldn't be that bright. Losing all depth in the shot compared to what you get on the Xiaomi. It just feels like it lacks soul. In this light shot, a bit of a difference in composition. My apologies for that. I was carrying 6 phones and sometimes this happens. But in terms of feel, you just get that far better feeling on the Xiaomi, where the iPhone is too bright, like someone again just bumped up that brightness. Not to mention that here actually the Xiaomi did do that better job with the dynamic range. With the main sensor, I would say the iPhone is capable of taking fine shots. It's able to deliver you those Instagram ready shots, or shots that you might want to edit to give it some character. Because compared to the Xiaomi, it lacks that a lot. The character, the feel, capturing the moment the way it was, or the feeling it gives, simply isn't really a thing on the iPhone. And again, this is me trying to help it where I can while using auto mode. Because let's be fair, most will simply capture in auto mode. But for those who love RAW, I will upload RAW files for my YouTube members, so they can check out those files themselves as well. Would I say the iPhone has a bad main sensor though? No, sure, it has its problems that it needs to work on, like the focus that sometimes just isn't there even though I tapped on the focus point. But also shots where it's not able to capture the focus on the flower in this case, where on the Xiaomi this took one try, where on the iPhone I simply gave up at the end. Even though the flower is close on the other shot that I took, it simply isn't able to capture it here, and that's probably because it's too small and doesn't have enough focus point on it. But apart from that, if you like a brighter shot with no character, I think the iPhone is fine in terms of main sensor with some decent dynamic range, and of course again if you like that brightness, it does that well. So far the best way to describe the experience between the Xiaomi and iPhone is that the iPhone needs a lot more work while testing also the front facing camera, which Xiaomi isn't good, but colors are accurate. Here on the iPhone it's really bright and not like that at all. Little contrast to the shot itself, exposure problems on the background. But when it comes to the experience with the iPhone, I need to keep adjusting settings to even make it a battle between the two, because simply put, the iPhone isn't very good, especially in stills where it's very lackluster in comparison to something like the Xiaomi that understands photography properly. And also it seems to get a lot brighter now, the shot on the iPhone, but that could just be me. Xiaomi's a little bit too dark, but you get the drift. Let's just rip the band-aid straight off when it comes to the ultra wide with this shot. By no means is the Xiaomi perfect, but compared to the iPhone 16 Pro, it is. With the iPhone, we get a lot of over-sharpening going on, the colors are dull, and when zooming in onto this windmill, you can see big problems with the artificial effect going on the leaves itself, but also the balance is so poor, and you can see the difference in actual details between these two. Now with this shot, which should be pretty easy on both of them, the iPhone again loses out in terms of colors. It again looks artificial, a lot of over sharpening going on the windmill itself. But one thing I will give it though, the sky is closer to reality on it. And the light is less harsh on the windmill itself, even though that was reality when it comes to what you are seeing on the Xiaomi. But the over sharpening on this shot is insane, and that can really damage some shots. We'll get to that. Here in this shot, at first glance, there isn't much to comment on. Some color difference, sure, and a tad bit more saturation on the grass itself on the Xiaomi, where I do like it a little bit better on the iPhone. But again, we notice the sharpening, but the bigger effect it has is the much more noise going on the picture, especially at the bottom. In terms of the open air museum, this is basically the only picture that I would say the iPhone did pretty well. It retained some of the colors, it doesn't have a too bright sky like you see with the Xiaomi. That really does have an issue with this shot when looking at the sky and the top of the windmill. But just like before, this is more of a rarity than a standard when it comes to this. But as always, for fairness, it is something that I wanted to showcase. That being said, it still has issues with over sharpening and some grain on the edges. Here another windmill shot where life seems to be sucked out of the iPhone. Yes, the Xiaomi has a bit more saturation on the windmill and the yellow parts, but it's much closer to reality. The sky is a tad too blue, but again the iPhone just feels very flat in terms of depth, in terms of colors, and as before, too much artificial sharpening. Last one at the open air museum, same boat as we used on the main sensor, and again it's not even close. But in this shot I really wanted to highlight some big issues. While the Xiaomi isn't perfect with the white building being overexposed, the iPhone has so much artificial sharpening, the lack of any proper shadow that really makes this shot feel like a $500 phone. Nothing like you would expect from an expensive phone like this that claims to have upgraded the ultra wide. This simply is a very poor result. Back to Periscope, with a small modern section that I wanted to highlight. This isn't a very hard lighting condition by any means, but again you can see so much artificial things going on when it comes to the iPhone shot. But mainly the over sharpening, the lack of details, and just a very poor result from the iPhone compared to the ultra wide on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra that is clearly leagues above the iPhone 16 Pro and isn't even the best ultra wide out there. Outside of Periscope. In this shot again, perfectly showing the problems that you can have with over sharpening, which will have more effect on shots like this as well, like the pebbles on the path that you are walking and the water itself, with just too much sharpening going on. The ultra wide is really poor in a lot of situations, even if lighting is pretty much ideal for it. Now in this shot it isn't much about the style of the shot itself, but I wanted to try something and see how the iPhone handles very harsh situations when it comes to the ultra wide, having a dark environment but light coming in from every direction. And it's poor, it's really poor, and a clear indication is the blue hue that we are getting on top of the image itself, with a lot of softening going on at that point as well. Because in not ideal lighting it really starts to falter when it comes to the iPhone. The amount of problems with the ultra wide I have is just a mess. The biggest thing is simply it looks artificial. In this shot it should look stunning, and it does on the Xiaomi, but again on the iPhone it looks like a $500 phone captured this. The sharpening, sure there is a preference part when it comes to the colors, but the sharpening is a real issue. But then also the lack of depth in the shot, the lack of proper colors, the lack of shadows makes the shot really poor. And even more so the noise all over the shot, even more so around the edges, which is made much worse with the sharpening itself. Now for this part I actually wanted to make an AWOL part in between, because I feel like I gotta make a statement here. This is a €1,200 phone, even a little bit more, with 128 gigabytes inside of it. This is a result that you shouldn't be getting on any phone that you pay that kind of price for. I am not talking about preference here. Preference is beside the point here. This is about the amount of noise that is going on for a €1,200 phone. That's unacceptable for this kind of price, and that's something that Apple should be held accountable for, because that is really piss poor when it comes to the result itself, when it comes to the ultra wide and the performance. Not only this shot, but some other shots as well. The first shot that I showed you as well has a lot of issues. €1,200. If you aren't ready to release a product with the results not being on par yet, don't release it. Simply put. Anyway, let's continue, but I really wanted to make this statement because this is unacceptable. When it comes to the ultra wide on the iPhone 16 Pro compared to what is not even the best on the market when it comes to the ultra wide, the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it falters badly. It is really poor in execution on the iPhone side, and these are unacceptable results for an iPhone that costs so much. Sure, in ideal lightings and not even small challenges, the ultra wide can take some decent shots here and there, but make it a challenge even in good lighting and it falters hard. I do not get for a moment how Apple is rated so high when I get these kinds of results from it. Every single time I took shots with the ultra wide, I seriously question how this is €1,200. Sure, the dynamic range is better out of the windows when it comes to the iPhone, but does that matter if the rest of the shot looks so cheap, looks so poor, has a ton of noise and zero character captured? This generally makes me annoyed with the result itself. When it comes to the ultra wide, the iPhone 16 Pro is not only easily handled by the Xiaomi, it loses out to the likes of the OnePlus 12, which is much cheaper. That sure didn't capture the colors correct here with too much warmth, but at least it isn't noisy, a flat mass, and looks something straight out of an early years mobile photography kind of result, or cheap Alcatel or whatever kind of phone experience. And I could make it so much worse. It's not just the OnePlus that beats it. This is the Xiaomi Redmi Turbo 3, the Harry Potter edition, which is by the way a beautiful phone. But look at the result that I'm getting. How is a $450 phone outperforming an iPhone 16 Pro when it comes to the ultra wide? This is unacceptable. I know these days when it comes to the camera results on phones, a lot of it is software, and therefore it could be that in a few weeks or months of time it will be much better than it currently is. But I do not subscribe to potentials that we don't know about, that we think, oh, that might fix everything. I showcase what it does now, not on future promises. And what it does now is really poor and unacceptable for this kind of price. Photography is supposed to be fun and a joy. With this iPhone, even more so because of the ultra wide, it feels like a chore. To showcase the difference between the two in main camera and how they perform, it's a little bit windy, so you can check out the audio quality between the two and how they process the wind itself. And just to showcase the difference, it shows a lower aperture for the Xiaomi automatically, because of course you have a variable aperture on the Xiaomi where you don't on, of course, the iPhone. Using ultra wide just to showcase how they perform. Definitely the Xiaomi has more contrast to the shot itself. It's also, of course, the darker shot, because that's what we know from Xiaomi. Let's go for that kind of approach where it's a bit more cinematic. Where on the iPhone it's pretty much going for dull and lacking any contrast. Really nice balance to the shot itself. But in terms of like smoothness, normally after the processing, it's really good. You stack up, especially when it comes to these kinds of shots. Android is more chance of moving, but it does a little bit of a jitter. iPhone is really bright and looks a little bit messy on the phone, but that's on the phone. Jermaine. Time to shortly discuss the Periscope as well, where I don't think in daytime it's terrible, with some situations being perfectly fine. But this isn't one of them. It has too much oversharpening, lack of colors, lack of shadows, especially compared to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra. It's not a good shot on the iPhone 16 Pro. But with this shot, which is really easy for both, I think it did fine. Sure, details are better on the Xiaomi, with also a bit more noise on parts of the shot itself on the iPhone, but overall I think it's relatively an easy shot and the iPhone has done decently well here. Now with this windmill shot, colors are pretty similar to each other. There are some small differences, but they're pretty similar, and I think both did fine. Zoom in and you will notice there are more details on the Xiaomi and a decent amount of noise on the iPhone. But it's not something that disrupts the image like you see with, for instance, the ultra wide, where that noise really disrupts the shot itself. Clearly, it's not the best, but I've seen worse. Like this. Here the iPhone couldn't get the balance right at all, resulting in a very bright mess. Sure, nothing appealing about the shot, but it's something that I wanted to test and showcase in terms of difference, especially with so much breaks, seeing how it would affect the sharpening of the shot itself. And with this one again, pretty much perfect lighting. But here the iPhone without a doubt has too much sharpening going on, a decent amount of noise, and it lacks a nice contrast. Also during shooting these kinds of distances, the iPhone is far less stable and more wobbly. This makes it much harder to frame the shot because of it. Zooming in 10 times, you can even see more of that noise, like a lot more noise of it compared to the Xiaomi. It isn't even close to it, and again, we're talking about ideal lighting here. And the same counts for this shot. A lot more noise, some sharpening, and that makes the noise stand out more, and not great in terms of colors whatsoever. But at the moment I feel like I'm somewhat repeating what I'm saying when it comes to the Periscope. It's fine, more noise at this level of 5x zoom, but nothing too bad, just not great. Zoom in 10 times and yeah, that noise will be more amplified and more noticeable of course. But overall I think it's decently fine. The end. The Periscope can in ideal lighting capture some fine shots. Nothing that feels too poor like the ultra wide. That being said, there are some shots in between that really do look poor in comparison to something like the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, especially looking at the details here. And now we get to a part that is difficult. Portrait photography. And not necessarily because of how you take the pictures. It's because simply put, I'm an introvert. I don't like approaching people that I don't know. Next to it, I'm an average looking dude and I don't know what people think of me when I approach them. So, we'll have to make do with me as portrait, which is very difficult to set up, and 2 shots were taken by my brother, so at least there's some help when it comes to that, but of course I don't have full control over that. Let's begin with this first shot, and in first glance I would say that both look fine in their own right. The iPhone definitely is quite a lot brighter than what you get on the Xiaomi, and the Xiaomi definitely has my preference, but also if you look, the Xiaomi has done a much better job in terms of depth, where on the iPhone it looks like it's done poorly on Photoshop. In this next shot, this is at Periscope low, and I will say yes, depth is very different. I don't know why the iPhone didn't capture the depth at all when I had portrait photography on. Also, I noticed quite a bit more noise in comparison, but the Xiaomi is quite a lot softer than it should be. I do like the depth of course better, but in terms of softness, it loses some of the details because of it. And in this shot again at Periscope low, the iPhone somehow didn't capture the depth of field yet again. But let's judge it for the image itself. Again, I would say soft can look good depending on the kind of person that you're shooting or the environment that you're in. I think it works here to a degree, but because it's a statue itself, it loses out on some of the details that you can see on the iPhone. Closer up, here the depth of field did work on the iPhone itself. Again, the iPhone is quite a lot sharper than what you get on the Xiaomi. The Xiaomi is a little bit more closer to reality in terms of colors, just like the previous shot as well. And it isn't as soft as before. I would say the iPhone oversharpens a little bit. I would say the Xiaomi softens a little bit too much, but not as much as the shot that I showcased just a second ago. In this shot, again, it's just very hard to take a shot of yourself, but see the difference in terms of colors especially. I would say, while I find the shot on the Xiaomi a little bit better in terms of color, it does show up red quite a bit more. But the iPhone, yes, it looks a bit off, but in terms of skin color, it definitely is better. I do like some parts of the Xiaomi better, and I do like some parts on the iPhone better. It really depends on what you are looking for. Now, the iPhone is limited to 1x, 2x and 5x zoom when it comes to portrait. The Xiaomi of course has several focal lengths that you can use in terms of portrait photography, so it is far less limited. When it comes to this shot, what I will say is that both of them have a similar kind of color. They're close to each other in terms of how it was. So in terms of that, I think both did well. The Xiaomi here is the one that is a little bit sharper and a little bit more detailed compared to what you get on the iPhone. Not by much, but still something that is noticeable. Now looking at this shot, there are some things that I've noticed. The Xiaomi has some parts that are quite a bit softer than it should be, like for instance the head itself. It lacks details that we do see on the iPhone at this 5x range. What I also will say is that in terms of the focus, I feel like, simply put, I don't think both of these are great, but the iPhone does have a little bit better focus, but in turn a little bit less details. However, I will say from the get-go, when it comes to the Xiaomi, where I thought at the beginning that the portrait mode was fixed when it comes to the very pale skin when using 35 or 24mm equivalent, it isn't. I still get shots where I get that very pale look on my skin. So do keep that in mind. If you are taking portrait shots with those focal lengths, you will get a very pale skin, especially if you have my complexion. Either way, I know this isn't a very detailed portrait photography shot, but I do hope that it helped answering some questions when it comes down to it. Do keep in mind, I will still meet that friend and I will make separate videos for the portrait photography. Probably just one showcasing several phones and how they perform in terms of portrait. Now when it comes to macro photography, the iPhone uses the ultra wide, where on the Xiaomi you use the telephoto. When it comes to how it works, the iPhone does get closer, but for instance in this shot, colors aren't even remotely close to being accurate. There is a yellow hue, however, that the Xiaomi didn't capture. In this second shot, again, I would say it's really dependable on where the focus is. It's hard to capture these things. Even with a little bit of wind, it does disrupt the image. The iPhone did capture it a little bit more detailed in some parts, but also at the same time, I feel like the contrast and overall shot is much nicer on the Xiaomi. When it comes to this shot, a huge difference is noticeable. Look at how much more natural depth of field we have on the Xiaomi. Not to mention, in terms of contrast, exposure, it's much better on the Xiaomi. That being said, it is easier to get closer on the iPhone than you can on the Xiaomi. The focal distance is better on the iPhone. But do keep in mind, when you use macro photography, light is important. So having the sensor close is probably a downside if you want to capture something that doesn't have ideal lighting, like these. In this shot again, the iPhone just went crazy with the yellow hue that is there. The Xiaomi isn't perfect by any means because it's simply too white, it needs some of that warmth. But in turn, I will say because of how Xiaomi approaches it, it's much better in terms of details as well. Now I told you this would be a long video because only now we're going to low light and talk about performance here between the Xiaomi 14 Ultra and the iPhone 16 Pro. In this first low light shot, straight away I feel like it's far better on the Xiaomi. It looks like it's actually night instead of a cloudy evening kind of feel that you're getting on the iPhone. Not to mention that the trees have a lot more sharpening going on the iPhone. In turn though, parts of the Xiaomi look too soft, losing details because of it. But that's better than having softening and sharpening happening at the same time, giving this weird soft grain look. In this shot, the iPhone struggles a lot. Not only is there a big haze effect on it, but it also struggles way more with the dynamic range and colors. The Xiaomi isn't perfect, but easily beats the iPhone here when it comes to the scene look, but also in terms of the technical side, where we are talking about, for instance, dynamic range, and again, less noise on the shot as well. Now the Bridge of Arnhem, one that was completely destroyed by the war itself. But I have so many takes here. Let's begin with the iPhone. The light control is pretty poor because it almost infects the entire shot itself, giving this very clear blue hue over the shot itself. Not to mention that the lens glare is affecting it as well. Sharpening here though is good and it works on a bridge shot like this. Now the Xiaomi, we do have a bit of a lens glare, but nothing like the iPhone. And while the image looks softer, the details are retained better without adding that sharpening. And now we are on top of that same bridge. Both struggle a bit with lens glare, and honestly in terms of result, both look very similar. Though the Xiaomi retained a little bit more details, but not by much honestly. In this shot I have mixed feelings. Both capture the scene pretty well, though the dynamic range is a bit better on the iPhone, but a bit better lens flare control on the Xiaomi. Both did okay, but nothing more than that. Now I think this shows a big difference between the two. The building has harsh light on it, both on the front, side, everywhere. With the iPhone the light is balanced out more because of the lack of shadows, compared to the Xiaomi that keeps that shadow there, truly retaining the feel that was there while I was taking this shot. Though again, at some parts the Xiaomi is a bit too soft for night photography. But apart from that, the Xiaomi here easily wins in terms of capturing what I'm actually seeing. Now I really like the setup here, the warm tones, the different colors, the vibe that it gives, that is captured beautifully by the Xiaomi. However, on the iPhone side, not only is it trying to be too bright, it also has a lesser dynamic range and also has some lens flares again. Not to mention more noise, less details, and parts of it are just a bit of a mess. Here, this building is pretty much right. Yellow hues are there, but it's very minimal. So straight from that point of view, the Xiaomi has done a better job with capturing how it was in reality. Zooming in also reveals a little bit more noise on the iPhone, but honestly not by that much. In this shot, I wanted to see how it captured the reflection and the sign itself. I would say color-wise the iPhone is a tad more closer to reality, but the Xiaomi has the better dynamic range out of the two, and as well, of course, less noise. At this train station, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think the iPhone did a better job with capturing the light colors here, with that yellow hue that you have on the left side of the shot itself, where with the Xiaomi it captured a nicer exposure and feel of those lights. Out of the two though, I would pick the iPhone here. And pretty much the same in terms of lights that are going on here. Though I would say the iPhone is a bit too bright on the bricks itself compared to what it actually was, where the Xiaomi loses out a bit when it's not really capturing the lights that it's hitting it. So I would say here it's a bit of a tie, but I think both did a fine job on their own way, but nothing crazy here. In general, when it comes to the main sensor and low light, the iPhone struggles more with noise. The lens flare is more affecting the iPhone as well. The Xiaomi sometimes can be too soft, and at that train station it didn't capture the different levels of colors when it comes to the lights itself. But I think if you don't make it too hard, the iPhone is pretty decent but nothing great. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra at the end I would easily rate above the iPhone because it captures more details and better retains the feel of night, and of course has less issues with lens flare. Ultra wide time. The poor ultra wide time. Again, starting with the church in Arnhem, and again the iPhone is trying too hard to make it a brighter image. Now the Xiaomi has some over softening going on, which does come at a cost of details, and it's something that Xiaomi must work on. But in terms of feel, it's far better, not to even mention the noise. Both though I don't think are good at all, but at least the Xiaomi captured the feel properly. How do I even start this? Let's begin fairly and ignore the obvious problems on the iPhone shot. And we see that both don't have a great dynamic range, with both not doing a very good job in general when it comes to the details. But at least it doesn't have some huge problems in the sky around the image itself. Again, the Xiaomi shot isn't great, but at least it doesn't have that huge error. And don't even think that this is the only shot that has that issue. No. This image shares the same problem. Again, a weird artifact going on around the sky itself and even at the bottom. Again, the Xiaomi isn't great in these shots, but at least it's usable. Here we have it peeking through again. Huge error in the sky itself. Did any of the employees at Apple test this phone when it comes to the camera? Because it's supposed to be a camera upgrade compared to the 15 Pro. If so, then I don't even want to know how bad the ultra wide is on the 15 Pro. Again, the Xiaomi has its struggles, but it wins by default because at least the image doesn't have huge problems and artificial effects in the sky or whatever this is. And you can think, surely this was the last time. No. Here we go again. Well, yes, it now has better light effects on the roof compared to the main sensor. It becomes a non-argument, not even a battle if you get those huge issues in the sky or even around the image itself. But sure, let's ignore the obvious errors in the sky and the ground and everywhere and try to judge the image without that. Here, I would say in terms of these two, they look very similar in approach, both having issues with the way it is way too soft and lacking details. Honestly, when it comes to the ultra wide, I think that the Xiaomi 14 Ultra needs work, no question about it. For this iPhone 16 Pro, it needs a damn priest to pray for proper results when it comes to this iPhone 16 Pro and the ultra wide, and we aren't even talking about video just yet. Again, the Xiaomi needs work without a doubt. But boy, imagine this against the Vivo X100 Ultra. Yes, it will come. This seriously is so poor. It would be to a degree acceptable if it didn't have the huge problems in the sky itself. I know it's hard to capture these scenes. That's the challenge of these kinds of scenes, to showcase how they perform in these challenging situations. And it would somewhat be acceptable if in daytime it actually managed to capture some shots well too. but it didn't. It doesn't do well. There is no excuse I can give for the iPhone 16 Pro that I'm paying for out of my own pocket to be this weak when it comes to the ultra wide. Front-facing camera, iPhone versus Xiaomi for 60 frames per second. Versus Xiaomi. Override isn't always better, by the way. It looks way more like it does on the Xiaomi. Also not now there. Xiaomi definitely is way too dark. First two. And times 5. So I also wanted to showcase a short moment how both of them perform when it comes to the periscope. So in this first shot, again the night view is far better retained on the Xiaomi, but I do like parts of the iPhone itself where it's a bit sharper, and on shots like this it works. However, if you look further into the sky itself, you see a lot of noise and beginning to have weird artifacts, looking pretty poor, but nothing like the ultra wide, lucky enough. Zooming into this shot, and this is the first time where the Xiaomi clearly misses the focus point, making the result poor. The iPhone is still affected by the light around it to a high degree, and it gives this blue hue over the entire image, but the image in turn is usable where the Xiaomi shot is not. In this shot again we see a huge difference in terms of approach. The iPhone is a lot sharper, far brighter compared to not just Xiaomi but also reality. I think here it comes down to a preference. Now in this shot the iPhone failed to capture the focus itself, making the image unusable. Where with the Xiaomi the shot is actually pretty nice, with some decent dynamic range control on the lights itself and retaining that night feel that is so important. In this shot we can not only see a big difference in terms of approach, with it just like before having that yellow light difference done properly on the iPhone, but in turn there's a lot more noise, and then because of course the way that phone cameras work, they are softening the shot itself with sharpening, and then you get this noise that is softened, which looks really weird and poor. In this shot the Xiaomi has the better dynamic range control out of the two, but in terms of colors and capturing the scene, both did pretty similar and both did pretty decent here. But there is more noise on the iPhone by a decent amount. Now Tsubasa in my community tab had an idea to talk shortly about battery life but also heat. Now when it comes to the Xiaomi 14 Ultra, it's not good at heat dissipation by any means. But when it comes to shooting between these two, I noticed a lot more heat on the iPhone 16 Pro. When it comes to battery life on the Xiaomi 14 Ultra isn't great by any means, and the iPhone 16 Pro did perform better when it comes to battery life. Oh boy, the iPhone 16 Pro versus the Xiaomi 14 Ultra gives a clear image on how poor the performance on the iPhone 16 Pro actually is. So, let's discuss my findings with this comparison and my opinion at the end. Now, I fully understand that part of what I'm saying is down to preference. For instance, the 48 megapixel main sensor is fine. It's okay, it's decently acceptable. Sure, it doesn't have my preference in terms of style, but that's something that is down to me and not necessarily the case for anyone else. But when it comes to the ultra wide, how is that acceptable for a phone that costs 1,200 euros with 128 gigabytes of storage? When it comes down to it, the iPhone 16 Pro and the camera performance, especially with the supporting lenses with a standing out problem being the ultra wide, is unacceptable. This kind of camera doesn't belong on a 1,200 euro phone. Let me remind you again, 1,200 euro, and I get pictures like this in daytime. Not to even mention low light as well, where we have huge issues with the ultra wide itself, where pictures become unusable. Even in daytime we have pictures that become unusable, suffer from a huge amount of noise and problems with colors as well. The The iPhone 16 Pro, when it comes to the camera performance, especially now if you compare it to something that is actually capable of understanding photography and has good supporting lenses, just feels so poor. The ultra wide feels like it's from a $500 Android phone. It's that poor, and in terms of colors, I would say it's even worse, where it feels like a cheap Alcatel from like 2017 or something like that made that image. Because simply put, this kind of result is something that you do not expect for a €1,200 phone. This is unacceptable for that price to be so poor. And I'm not talking about preference here, this is the technical side of the camera experience with the ultra wide itself. Sure, the Periscope isn't amazing, but I don't think it's a slouch by any means. There are some pictures that I've taken on it that are actually quite nice. Sure, in low light it isn't the best performer, but still it's fine to a degree. But when it comes to that ultra wide, it's unacceptable for a phone like this to have that kind of lens on it, especially if you now compare it to something that is actually somewhat capable. The Xiaomi 14 Ultra doesn't have the best ultra wide, especially in low light. Yes, it struggles, but it doesn't have the issues that you're seeing here on the iPhone 16 Pro, which really struggles to deliver in daytime and in low light photography. Either way, this was my comparison, and before we end it, I really want to thank my members as well. Thank you very much. Of course, for those people, the WAR files will be uploaded, so you can check them out in the community tab itself. But when it comes to it, I really want to say thank you for supporting the channel. If you want to become a member, you can by joining somewhere below on the video itself. And of course, I do really appreciate it if you did, but you don't have to. What you could do is, support us, like the video, watch full and all that stuff, and subscribe if you aren't subscribed yet. And of course, if you did enjoy the video, let me know in the comments below. And of course, talk to you guys in the next, which will be iPhone 16 Pro versus the Vivo X100 Ultra. Wish me good luck, because that's gonna be a long one as well, probably. Either way, hope you enjoyed this video, and talk to you guys in the next.